A record 6,036 U.S. kids killed, injured by gunfire in 2022. U.S. Supreme Court upholds policy of deporting asylum seekers before hearing their case. 220 Palestinians killed and 800 buildings demolished by Israel in 2022. Sports brings hope to many disabled people in Kashmir. 10 costliest climate disasters in 2022 cause at least $200 billion in damages as human suffering remains uncounted. Doctors and business executive combine Texas barbecue and traditional halal dishes. From Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Saamiyah Syed. Our top story tonight. With just a few days left until the new year, 2022 has already set a grim record. Overall, 6,036 children across the United States have been killed or injured by gunfire this year, according to the Gun Violence Archive. As of Tuesday, 306 children under the age of 12 were killed by guns and another 668 were injured in the United States. Among those between ages 12 and 17, over 1,000 were killed and more than 3,000 were injured. Those figures include the 19 children killed in the May 24th mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Recently, the nation marked the 10th anniversary of the massacre of 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newton, Connecticut. The Gun Violence Archive documents gun violence and gun crime nationally, providing independent, verified data for research, advocacy, and writing. Its annual figures for child deaths and injuries go back to 2014. The House January 6th committee released another batch of transcripts on Tuesday. These included 2 more interviews with witness Cassidy Hutchinson and testimony from several other Trump administration White House officials. They shed new light on how then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows regularly burned documents during the transition period. Hutchinson described how Meadows occasionally told staffers to keep some Oval Office meetings close hold and potentially omitted from official records. Additional details emerged about Hutchinson's dueling loyalties that led her to ultimately switch lawyers. She provided damning testimony about what she saw and heard at the White House after the 2020 election. That was when then-President Donald Trump refused to concede and tried to overturn the election results. The latest cache of transcripts also revealed that some of the rumors, gossip, and wild conspiracies floating around the White House. They included conversations about QAnon conspiracies. Rights advocates on Tuesday were disappointed with a 5-4 U.S. Supreme Court order to keep the policy used to swiftly expel migrants in place. Justices will hear arguments for the case in February, with a final decision due by the end of June. The administrations of former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden have used Title 42 to deny millions of people asylum proceedings during the pandemic. Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia, a Democrat running for mayor of Chicago, said seeking asylum is a human right. This is a disastrous order by the Supreme Court. He also said it is a cruel policy that was implemented using public health as an excuse. 5 right-wing Supreme Court justices made the ruling. Justice Neil Gorsuch and the court's 3 liberal justices dissented. Chief Justice John Roberts last week temporarily blocked a planned rollback of the policy ordered by a district judge. The FBI acts as a doorman to a vast program of social media surveillance and censorship, according to the latest Twitter Files release. The Twitter Files are a set of internal documents from the company that CEO Elon Musk made available to 5 journalists this month. Musk wanted them to present the information to the public. Journalist Matt Taibbi, one of the 5 journalists Musk shared internal documents with, said the platform had asserted that the FBI moderates the platform. Taibbi said the FBI's social media surveillance and censorship encompassed agencies across the federal government, including the State Department, Pentagon, and the CIA. The operation is far bigger than the reported 80 members of the Foreign Influence Task Force, he said. Taibbi also reports that the thousands of official reports flowed to Twitter from all over through the task force and the FBI's San Francisco field office. The FBI has not refuted previous claims about how it benefited from the social media platform. Taibbi also said the Bureau also claims that conspiracy theorists and others are feeding the American public information with the sole purpose of attempting to discredit the agency. Zahid Ahmed, Rehan Jafri, and Nege Molla are the halal barbecue pitmasters. They are curating spices to excite Texan Muslims' taste buds while working full-time jobs. Ahmed and Molla are physicians in the Dallas area. Jafri is the founder and chief operating officer of his own staffing company. They have combined their passion for brisket to create unique spices derived from traditional South Asian dishes with a Texas barbecue twist. Ahmed invented Texas tandoori to imitate the flavors of the traditional dish that includes a yogurt and spice mix. Molla came up with the sumac black spice. Jafri experimented with the South African peri-peri seasoning, combining it with the Asian teriyaki seasoning. They offer 6 spice rubs to choose from. Israeli forces killed more than 220 Palestinians this year, Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh said Tuesday. Shtayyeh was addressing a cabinet meeting in the West Bank city of Ramallah. He said Israel also demolished nearly 832 Palestinian-owned buildings, wounded over 9,000, detained 6,500, and uprooted 13,000 olive trees. Shtayyeh described 2022 as full of pain for Palestinians. Despite this, he cited some successes. These include his government managing to achieve a 3.6% growth rate and the unemployment rate in the occupied West Bank dropping from 19 to 12.6%. Shtayyeh was hopeful the flow of international aid and donations, especially from Arab countries, will be restored in 2023. A fuel crisis forced the largest hospital in Yemen's central Taiz province to stop operations Sunday, sources said. Al Thawra General Hospital said fuel shortage has caused all hospital sections to shut down, putting patients' lives at risk. The hospital runs on fuel donations from the UN agencies and international organizations, in addition to fuel shipments from local authorities. The Yemeni government and Houthi rebels share control of Taiz province amid a protracted civil war. The Yemeni conflict began in September 2014 when Houthi rebels captured much of the country, including the capital, Sana'a. A military coalition led by Saudi Arabia entered the war in early 2015 to restore the deposed government to power. The 8-year conflict has created one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, with millions at risk of starvation. A story on sports bringing hope to people in Kashmir comes after the break, so stay tuned and we will be right back after these messages.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid in Chicago. Just like you, I was moved by that Allahu Akbar lady. She stood her ground, fearful of none, for her hijab and for her education. Sisters and brothers, Indian Muslims are facing a genocide. India does not care for Muslim protesting, but it does care for the world opinion. Therefore, we must push the United Nations. The UN has a responsibility to protect. They must prevent genocide. Please sign this UN petition now. Get others to sign. It will help. Trust me, it will help. We need 1 million signatures, brothers and sisters. Please sign now.
Welcome back. Insha Bashir, an Indian-administered Kashmir, is captain of the Jammu and Kashmir women's wheelchair basketball team. The 28-year-old recently received a national award for individual excellence by the President of India on the eve of International Disability Day. Her team won a silver medal this year at the basketball championship in India. Bashir has won accolades and appreciation for her sporting abilities. She said she finds hope and solace in sports and continues to fight for the rights of people with disabilities in the Kashmir region. Bashir also works as a warden with the Voluntary Medicare Society to provide counseling and moral support to people with disabilities in the region. According to a study by Christian Aid, each of the 10 costliest extreme events in 2022 influenced by the climate crisis caused more than $3 billion in damages. Most of the estimates are based only on insured losses. The true financial costs are likely to be higher as the human toll often goes uncounted. The study shows the costs are usually higher in richer countries that have higher property values and can afford insurance. Hurricane Ian, which struck the U.S. and Cuba in September, is estimated to have cost at least $100 billion while displacing 40,000 people. World Bank estimates show floods in Pakistan from June to September cost $30 billion in damages, displacing 7 million and killing more than 1,700 people. Kosovo has shut its main border crossing with Serbia amid protests. Ethnic Serbs have erected more roadblocks in northern Kosovo. Serbia, supported by its allies Russia and China, does not recognize the statehood of its former province. About 50,000 ethnic Serbs who live in Kosovo refuse to recognize the capital Pristina's authority and still consider the region a part of Serbia. The developments came after President Alexander Vučić on Monday ordered the Serbian army and police on high alert in response to the latest events. Kosovo's government has previously accused the Serbian leader of attempting to stir up trouble and trigger incidents that could act as a pretext for an armed intervention. Pristina has asked NATO-led peacekeepers stationed there to remove the barricades set up by ethnic Serbs. About 4,000 NATO-led peacekeepers have been stationed in Kosovo since the end of the 1999 war between ethnic Serbs and Kosovars. An Iranian man committed suicide in France to draw attention to the situation in his country. French authorities said 38-year-old Mohamed Moradi was found in the Rhone River that flows through the city of Lyon late Monday. Emergency services intervened but were unable to resuscitate him on the riverbank. Moradi had posted a video on Instagram saying he was about to drown himself to highlight the crackdown on protesters in Iran. His death shocked the city, with a small rally to remember Moradi taking place on the banks of the Rhone Tuesday. Several members of the Iranian community said Moradi was an undergraduate studying history and worked in a restaurant. He had lived in Lyon with his wife for 3 years. Coming up after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we will be right back after these messages.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. It's time for our in-depth analysis segment. Let's watch.
More than 200 people are still dying each day because of COVID. On average, that is according to CDC. But majority of them, 90% of them, are 65 years or older. What's happening here? And now it is being said a new virus, which is focused on children, is also impacting the elderly. We have a guest to discuss that, Elizabeth Wrigley Field. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Field is an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Sociology and Minnesota Population Center. So tell us why the older people have more challenges. 90% death now is being said that 65 or older. Earlier, this was not the case. So why these people are still dying while other people are dying less?
Well, there's a few different things happening here. And one is that just biologically, COVID is much more severe in older people. It always has been. However, when vaccines first became available in the United States, this changed a little bit because older people became the most vaccinated people. And so in 2021, we saw a real switch where it began to be younger people, people in their middle ages, who were dying at relatively high rates compared to more elderly people. And now that's beginning to reverse back. And it's again, people who are very old who are at the most risk. And three big things are happening that are causing this. One is that not enough people have gotten booster shots. We have not made the efforts to make boosters widely available that we made with the original vaccines. We have not had enough locations where people can easily get them. Not everyone has paid time off of work to get them. We have not gone door to door and made them really accessible, and that has harmed older people the most. Second is that long-term care facilities and nursing homes are being really hard hit, and we can talk more about why people there are so vulnerable, but that's where so many of the deaths are happening now. And then the last thing is that a lot of the virus now has shifted to relatively more rural areas where there are older, whiter populations, and that's where a lot of COVID spread is happening, and so where a lot of deaths are happening now as well.
So the racial distribution of elderly initially was that in Chicago, for example, it will be Blacks and Latinos. Now you're saying it is the rural white who are facing that. Do they have the same health services issues as inner cities?
To a certain extent. And the racial patterning of COVID now is very complicated. So I don't want to oversimplify it. It's still the case that people of color are at disproportionate risk. For example, in Minnesota, where I live, we recently found that people of color who are ages 45 to 64 are at as much risk as people who are 65 to 74. So that's a really big difference in risk that people of color have. But it's also true that as vaccines have become available, people of color in the United States in general have been more likely to take advantage of them than white people have. And that has affected white populations' risk. It's put them at increased risk over time when risk for other groups has fallen.
So it is a switching situation. It's not a constant that always elderly are the one who are dying because of the COVID. But this, how is the access to healthcare? I mean, in rural areas versus inner cities?
A lot of people in the United States don't have the healthcare access that they should for different reasons. So a lot of rural areas have been extremely affected by hospital closures. This is particularly true in states that chose not to expand their Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. Their rural hospitals have not been able to afford to stay open. And so there have been tremendous hospital closures. And if you're in a rural area and the nearest hospital closes, the one that's now the nearest might be very far away. So that really impacts people's care access. In inner cities, though, the same kinds of things can be true where there's hospital closures that disproportionately serve poorer populations, populations of color. So there are some kind of surprising similarities in some of the challenges and experiences that people have in these very different parts of the country.
Now, what are your thoughts about the classification issue? Because older people have a variety of challenges, health-related. And people are just taking easy route of classifying as a COVID, while it may be a complexity of multiple things.
There's always a difficulty in when you assign what somebody died of on a death certificate. You pick one main thing that's the underlying cause of death, and then other things are contributing causes. And so this issue of some people are dying where COVID was a part of why they died, but not necessarily the whole reason, that's actually reflected on death certificates. So earlier in the pandemic, more than 90% of deaths where COVID was involved, COVID was listed as the underlying cause. Now it's lower than that. It's more like 3/4 of deaths will have COVID listed as the underlying cause, and the other ones will be listed as it's a contributing cause. So it's part of why people are dying, but it's not the only reason. But, if it's you or your loved one and you're thinking about, you don't really care about the population statistics. You care about, is my grandmother or my aunt or myself going to die, or are we going to live? And COVID can be the thing that makes the difference in whether someone who is having a heart attack or who's diabetic, whether they survive that experience.
In commute, I see there is hardly anyone who has a mask on any longer. Do you think we liberated ourselves too soon from the concern and care of social distancing and masking?
I do think so, especially now when hospitals are having a crisis of capacity with respiratory diseases, not just COVID, but also the flu, RSV affecting babies. All of these things are happening at once, and it's a real problem for hospitals. So masking in public in places like a grocery store or a movie theater is a great idea. But there's also a lot of other things that we could be doing that we're not. Two ones that to me are very obvious are we could improve air quality standards. So we could say that every workplace, school, and governmental building has to have a minimum quality of air that happens through ventilation and filtration so that aerosols don't build up. That would improve everybody's health. But we haven't enacted any new air quality standards in this pandemic. I think that's a huge mistake. And the other very obvious one is paid sick time, because it is endemic in this country that people go to work when they're sick, because they don't feel they have an economic choice. And that means that they make their coworkers sick, and there's really no reason that we should be living like that.
And now the railway workers are not going to get the 7 sick days off, and they are part and parcel of going things around. So they may be taking virus around with them as well. I mean, it's just such a carelessness there. In Chicago area, you know, for 3-4 weeks now, all hospitals are full with the RSV, virus called RSV. And children are being sent to other states. And now it's happening in the rest of the states. But do you think that brings some more complexity towards the older people?
Yeah, I mean, what this says to me is that we have a crisis for everyone, where respiratory diseases are overwhelming our hospitals. And they're especially impacting people who are very young, like babies, and people who are very old, and especially people who are very old and living in an institutional care facility like a nursing home. And these things could be addressed. In the case of nursing homes, one of the reasons why people who live there are so vulnerable is that people who work in nursing homes are paid so little that they often work multiple jobs, which means they can bring an illness from one home to the next. It's like if we were trying to design a super spreader event, this is what we would come up with. And there's no reason that it has to be that way, but I also don't think we can fix it without paying the people who work in those facilities a lot more than we're paying them now. So there's a sort of common thread here where workplaces have been a nexus of risk. And because hospitals are at their capacity, that risk is spreading beyond workplaces and affecting all of the most vulnerable people.
While looking into questions to ask you, I came across a concept called acceptable loss in reference to elderly. Who came up with this acceptable loss concept? And what is that concept?
So the idea is that when we make social decisions, that a certain level of death is tolerable and is sort of built into the decisions we make. But notice that when I say that, there's a lot that is sort of being swept over. For example, I said when we make decisions, but who is it that actually makes them? I have never gotten to choose, do I want to live in a society where people go to work sick when they have the flu? Or do I want to live in a society where everyone has paid sick leave and can stay home? So we don't actually make these decisions. A small number of people make them for everyone. And one of the problems with the idea of acceptable loss is that it sort of builds in some people's lives are expendable to other people. And you might think that that's not actually very fair.
Thank you so much, Professor Wrigley-Field, for your time. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. That's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.